What are modern, fast-growing companies doing to attract and hire top talent? How can your company utilize cutting-edge techniques and technology to drive long-term, repeatable results? Welcome to the Growth Recruiting Podcast, where we answer these questions and many more through conversations with top CEOs, leaders in talent acquisition, and pioneers in HR. Here's your host, Josh Tolan.
Today, I'm joined by Greg Russell, the head of talent at Snapdocs, which is a mortgage closing automation platform. They connect all of the moving parts in mortgage processing to create a seamless workflow for lenders, title and escrow, signing services, and notaries. Greg has an extensive track record in recruiting and has spent the last 10 plus years focused on empowering talent teams to be a driving force of growth at some of the most rapidly growing companies. Greg, what's going on?
How's it going, Josh? Thanks for having me.
For sure. I'm excited to have you on the podcast and have a really nice chat today about recruiting at startups. So first things first, if you could just give everyone an introduction to yourself, the current company you're at, and really anything you'd like to share.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been recruiting since the tail end of the .com days, the .com boom days, not to date myself. And I'm currently head of talent at a startup called Snapdocs, as you mentioned, and just really focused on building the function here. So very exciting times.
Nice. And so if I were a candidate applying to a position at Snapdocs, how would you explain to me what Snapdocs does?
Yeah, I would probably say something like we're automating and digitizing the mortgage closing process. This is a really Byzantine process without a whole lot of transparency. There's hundreds of pages of documents to sign, and they're coming from all different sources. There's not a whole lot of kind of transparency or holistic view as to what everything means and where they come from for the consumer. And then on top of all that, the height of technology in this process currently is the fax machine, essentially. So we're really just trying to bring some modern tools to this. And we're certainly, bringing more transparency and ease to the consumer. But really, probably the major focus is just making life better for the industry folks that are involved. So the title escrow folks, the like you mentioned, the signing services, the notaries, the lenders, everybody, right? So, we're certainly seeing and hoping that they benefit from some of these tools and just really trying to make them more efficient and make their everyday experience better in this industry as well.
Nice. So yeah, I mean, it's a pretty, disruptive technology to an industry, like you said, that's pretty archaic by nature. So, I'm just curious, are you finding that a lot of the candidates that are applying for your positions, that's what they're looking for? They're looking to join a disruptive type of company that's pretty much paving its own way in a new space?
Yeah, there's some of that, definitely. We kind of shy away from the word disruptive to some extent because it's,
Sure.
I suppose you can say it is disrupting, but at the same time, we're kind of trying to, the industry's there and it's not going anywhere, right? Our tools aren't going to radically change the whole industry, but we hope that, we can at least make this slice of the industry better for these guys. So we're kind of, while it may disrupt the way things have always been done, we're hoping that it's not disruptive overall. It's kind of more of a value add for these guys. But yeah, I think a lot of the candidates that we see are folks who, like me, love companies that are applying technology to real world problems, to kind of old school, segments of the world, right? That haven't really been exposed to a lot of modern online tools yet. So that's I think probably the kind of most prominent profile that we're seeing is, just folks who really, really love that idea.
Yeah, definitely. And are you getting interest from candidates that, maybe have worked in the mortgage industry, for example?
For sure. Yeah. All the time I see, candidates come through who in fact, as I've been recruiting recruiters, I've had several folks, hit me up that are coming out of real estate or out of the mortgage industry. And that's certainly, while that's certainly interesting, right? Having that background, I obviously need experienced recruiters at the same time.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so how many employees are you guys now?
So we're about, I think we are up to about 49 at the moment. And our growth plan has us getting to, adding about another 50 or 51. So getting right pretty much to 100 by the end of the calendar year.
Oh, nice. Wow. That's pretty impressive, doubling the team. And you just came on pretty recently, about 2.5 months or so.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I'm not quite through my first 3 months here.
So what drew you to first join the company?
Yeah. I think one word is people. So I just really connected with everybody that I met during the process, and was just super impressed with how smart everyone was, but at the same time, more than that, I think really just thoughtful. So just the fact that they were at the time a 42 or 43 person company, and they knew they needed to double, and a lot of companies might just look around and say, hey, who can do this? Hey, office manager, you've got some cycles, you recruit, or let's go get a contract recruiter, right? But everybody here was so thoughtful about it, and kind of thinking, hey, this is super important, right? Talent acquisition is going to be super important to the success of this company. So let's get someone in here who can actually architect something for us and build out a function.
Definitely.
That was really attractive as well.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, it sounds like at the size the company was at, it was like they hit that inflection point where it's like, okay, CEO can't do all the recruiting anymore, and we're going to be growing. It looks like you guys have raised some money as well. So obviously that puts some pressure on, increasing headcount and scaling the team. So it sounds like the timing was right to just bring somebody in that could start building out the talent function. So when you join a company like this, and you're the first person on board on the talent side of things, and you're trying to build out a new team, honestly, where does your work start? Like, what are the priorities from day one?
Yeah, it's day one is really assess, right? It's like what cards have I been dealt? What's here already? What's been done in the past? And just kind of really get a handle on that. Day two is like, okay, what's burning? What needs to be triaged? So it's it's kind of juggling a few priorities, right? It's very quickly getting out there and looking for the first recruiter and figuring out what that person needs to look like. It's jumping on anything that's super important. When I first got here, probably one of the first things I did was help the CEO with an EA hire, right? So we were looking for an EA for him, and that's a super important role in a growing startup, right? So just jumping in and kind of helping him get that going. And then obviously just looking around and, like I said, kind of assessing and saying, okay, so what are the priorities? What's first, second, and third, employment brand, and documenting the process, and making sure that lever is set up, the ATS system is set up properly. So it's like all these things, there's not necessarily a clear number one in some of that stuff, right? It's kind of, like I said, you gotta throw one of them up in the air and then throw the other one up, and then just make sure you start juggling, and just keep going.
Yeah, it's the nature of the startup, is you're just balancing and spinning a ton of plates at the same time.
That's right.
So have you guys brought anybody else on the team right now? I was looking on your careers page, and it looked like you're recruiting for a recruiter right now, but is the team still just you, or have other people joined on?
Yeah, no, I got my first recruiter about a month ago. She's been here about a month. So she's working about 9 roles for me right now, and she's already placed 2 people. So that's very, very exciting. And I just got a talent ops / coordinator person, and she's going to be starting in less than 2 weeks. And that is super, super exciting as well, because our life is going to get a lot better when she's here. My recruiter, Sam, will get probably 40% more efficient as soon as our ops person gets here. So that'll be brilliant as well.
Sure. Yeah, no, definitely. As you build out the team, it makes everybody else on the team better, just because you're starting to plug up all these holes in the boat.
That's right. That's right.
So looking on LinkedIn, I was seeing that, some of the characteristics that you're looking for, in people at Snapdocs is smart, hungry, and curious. So why those 3?
Yeah, those are the smart and hungry are kind of umbrella words for me. So smart, when I say smart, when I'm talking about a recruiter, I mean kind of a combination of street smart and EQ smart, right? So not necessarily, which is a little misleading maybe, because people see smart and they think Harvard or MIT smart, right? And my people, the recruitment tribe, are not necessarily Harvard or MIT people, right? They're Chico State and Fresno State people, but it's that kind of street smart and ability to figure things out quickly, and then just that smarts on the emotional intelligence side that are so important for a good recruiter. Hungry is kind of encompasses hustle and tenacity for me, right? So, that you gotta get after it, and get after it quickly, and at the same time, you gotta be prepared to never let it go, kind of thing, right? And so, So to me, that's kind of that hunger, that grit. And then curious is just, I always say if you ask recruiters who have worked for me in the past, you'll probably get a laugh about this, but I always say that why is the most important question, for a recruiter. So everything is about asking the question why. Why do we need someone from one of those 10 schools? Hiring manager. Why are you really looking to make a move, candidate? And really, having the kind of having, again, going back to the tenacity, right? Having the tenacity to kind of stick with that and go down some rabbit holes sometimes with people and just be really curious about what's going on in a given situation is just so important.
Sure. No, it makes total sense. So what are some of the roles, besides hiring people for the talent team, what are some of the roles you guys are recruiting for right now?
Yeah, well, surprise, surprise, we're looking for a bunch of people on the engineering side of the house. So
of course.
Yeah. So software engineer, DevOps, we're looking for an engineering manager. We've got a whole bunch of customer success roles, business operations. We're looking for a product designer. So a really good mix, actually, of roles kind of across the company.
Yeah, no, and obviously you've done, a lot of recruiting in the San Francisco area and the tech space for a little while now. So, I mean, do you still find it challenging with, all these different roles that you're recruiting for to learn, a lot about the different positions?
Yeah, sometimes, I think with a company like ours, that is a little bit extra challenging, right? Because we are really first mover in the space. And so there's no real roadmap or playbook, how to build this type of company, right? Like if we were, I don't know, if we were an e-commerce company or something, you go, okay, well, this is, we know roughly the mix of people we need and what they're going to do. We don't really know that, we know some of that. And we're figuring a lot of that out on the fly. And so there's that extra challenge, right? Figuring out what each role does, but kind of what we need it to do and what it means in our world, right? So it's another layer. But that's actually that's always been one of my favorite parts of recruiting is just, the ability to really know and understand what all these different people in an organization do and how they contribute to the value of a business without ever having played that role yourself, right? It's kind of a unique position to be in.
For sure. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, I think it's a cool challenge. And I think, if you're going to recruit for startups, you also have to be super adaptable just because, like you said, you don't really know necessarily the roles you're going to need to recruit for a year out. You don't know which types of positions you need within the company to carry out certain responsibilities because you're paving your own way. You're figuring things out as you go. And then once you figure them out, obviously, then you know what you need. And it's pretty predictable as far as, what the growth plans are. But definitely in the early days, and especially as you're scaling from, 20 to 50 and 50 to 100 people, that can be a challenge for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So as you're building out, the team at Snapdocs, specifically on the recruiter side, we talked about, smart, hungry, and curious. Are those like the main things that you're looking for, or what else really goes into, somebody that would be a great startup recruiter?
Yeah. So I think I touched on a couple of these, that under those other three, but tenacity, hustle, accountability. Accountability is so important, in a fast moving startup and just especially when you're on site. So, I wind up hiring a lot of agency recruiters and kind of teaching them how to be on-site recruiters. And that accountability piece is super important because it's just a different vibe. It's a different level of accountability sitting on site next to your hiring manager rather than, just being at the end of the phone with them. So, so that's super important. I think great recruiters have especially in a small company, have a really strong customer service ethos. So, really looking at your hiring managers as your client and also your candidates as your client, right? I think you really need to have a thick skin. We're moving fast and, not to be cliche, but, you move fast and you break stuff sometimes, right? And so
sure,
that means that there's friction sometimes and the recruiter often, when things fall apart, it's often the recruiter that gets the blame. You need to just be able to let that roll off your back, right, and not take it personally. And then two other things, that again, my anybody who's worked for me will laugh at this, but just driving the bus is how I always say it, right? So just that sense of ownership for what you're doing, so you're, that role, if you're working a DevOps role, that's you, right? That's you. You need to drive that. You need to drive that role. And, no matter what happens, it always comes back to you, right? We're going to be looking at you to see whether we've filled that. So if you feel like it's stuck, you're stuck in the rooms, you're doing the same thing over and over. We'll stop doing the same thing over and over, right? Drive the bus and get the people together who need to get together and figure out how we get through this, right? How we get unstuck. And then the last one that I think is super important for recruiters, especially on site at a really fast moving startup, is to always assume positive intent, right? So I think, sometimes you get recruitment is so busy, it's such a manic job, and you got all these different moving pieces, and it's, there's a sales element to it, except you're selling people to people, these irrational beasts. So these irrational beasts. So it's it can be really tough, and sometimes you think, oh geez, the hiring manager, they put this role on hold, they changed the role, like, why are they doing this to me, kind of thing, right? And you always have to remember there's a reason. There's they're acting in their best interest. They're doing what they think is best for their little patch of the business. And sure, that might affect you, but they're not doing it just because they're trying to ruin your numbers or ruin your day, right? So I think that's so important to remember.
Yeah, definitely. And I like that you related it to sales. I mean, I always tell salespeople, like, sales can be a lonely job. You're going to have your up days, and then you're definitely going to have your down days where, nobody's picking up the phone, people just aren't getting back to you, whatever it is. So, definitely a startup recruiter, needs to be somebody that's super resilient and, can push through rejection and can push through those bad days and look towards, the optimistic side. So, those are all really good characteristics of a great startup recruiter. Do you think there are, key differentiators between somebody that would recruit very well at, a startup in a fast-paced environment versus somebody that, is just at your typical corporation, typical everyday type of pace?
Yeah. I think that the two biggest things are probably, and you mentioned this earlier, right, is the flexibility and adaptability. It's just so important in a startup, right? So a larger corporation, you're probably going to have, just a lot less kind of change, a lot less, of the hiring manager saying, oh, actually, it's completely different now, right? And so you do get that a lot in a startup, or if things change, right? We're not hitting our numbers, or we're, hey, we're doing really great with this new feature. This thing's actually, potentially a whole product. Let's focus on this. And so all of a sudden the hiring plan changes to support that. And you might have to drop something you've been working on for 5 weeks and work on something else. And you just have to roll with that, right? And then I think the other thing is, already mentioned, is just that sense of ownership and accountability, because it is smaller, right? There's less less people to turn to, right? And so you've got to take on more of that ownership and accountability, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And from a growth standpoint, like you said, there could all of a sudden be, a feature that's working out really well is taking off, and that can lead into a whole new product. So from a planned growth standpoint, like obviously, you said you're looking to be at about 100 people by the end of the calendar year. How do you guys plan for that type of rapid growth? How do you know what you're going to need 6 months out, and really how do you approach that?
It starts with a hiring plan, right? So that's, at the CEO and in our case, the VP of Ops, right? They kind of work together and put that together at a high level, plan with input from different groups in the business. And then, again, you go back to those words, flexible and adaptable, right? It's not in the startup, that hiring plan isn't, handed down on January 1st in stone and never changes, right? It's a living document. And so, it's just really staying close to that, document, and, and not being afraid to revise that as things change in the business. And then for me and my team, I need to kind of stay close to that process and stay close to the business and what's happening, right? What are some key business decisions at any given time that might change that roadmap. So then, I'm prepared to very nimbly and quickly change direction with any of my team that need to.
Sure. No, makes sense. So just looking through your LinkedIn, extensive background, and I was reading about, how you hired, you trained, you mentored recruiters that now work at like amazing companies, Facebook, Fitbit, Square, Pandora, Google, DoorDash, Pinterest. I mean, the list goes on and on. So obviously there were things that you taught the recruiters that were working for you in the past, stuff that has really helped them propel into careers, specifically recruiting at, whether it's a startup or just a really fast growing tech company. So what do you believe, like, what is the biggest thing that you feel like you've learned about recruiting at startups that you passed on to these people that have made them successful in their roles?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. When I think of it, there's probably kind of three main things, and two of them I've already touched on. So, driving the bus again, right, and assuming positive intent. I think the other one is, and I did kind of touch on this previously about having thick skin, right? It's kind of more than that. It's like what did I used to call it? I think I used to call it the be cool method of recruiting, right? When I was training recruiters, and that is like the idea that the recruiter is kind of becomes, or not becomes, they just naturally are the kind of hub or the nexus for anything in the hiring process. And so they're in the middle of it when when somebody's losing their mind about something, right? The hiring manager is upset because the candidate is trying to negotiate something that he didn't expect he was going to negotiate, or the candidate is feeling like they're not that happy with something in the process, right? And that all comes back to the recruiter, and the recruiter has to be the cool head, right? And they have to be able to say, no, actually, hiring manager, this is actually a good thing that he's negotiating this or XYZ, and just really needing to always be the cool and level head and be able to think very quickly in those situations to kind of keep something alive, or make a quick call and say, hey guys, this is a clear sign that we should be ending this process right now with this candidate. But
Sure.
In a cool and non-emotional way, right? Just take all the emotion right out of it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's interesting because as I hear you talk, I hear like a lot of principles that I feel like somebody would learn as a recruiter on the agency side, because I think a lot of people, they focus on the relationships with the candidates and everything the recruiter has to do with the candidates. And that's all very important. The candidate is your client, but also so is a hiring manager. So there's a lot of nurturing, and there's a lot of relationship building, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into managing the relationships with the hiring managers just as much as it is with, candidates. And I think that's something that obviously, somebody who's on the agency side really understands, but not always on the corporate side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, absolutely, the agency guys understand it, but they haven't, while they understand it, they kind of haven't been exposed to the depth of relationship that they're going to have all of a sudden when they're here. And it's like, that hiring manager is sitting 5 feet away, and
Right. It's every day versus like a transactional,
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So, as far as on the strategy side, so, you got started 2.5 months ago, you're starting to build out the team, you're getting the hands around the ATS lever, which is an awesome ATS, by the way. And really, I think, probably one of the biggest challenges is I think about startup recruiting is when you come in on day one, like there's probably not much on the employer branding side. You probably don't really have too much effort going into the candidate experience. So where do you start on those levels? Like you don't really probably have much content to really promote careers at Snapdocs, and just on the branding side, especially as an up and coming company, like not many people might know the name yet. So where do you start on that side of things?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, with the branding, you start from the start. You just start from, okay, what is the story? What is our story? What do we want to be saying to candidates? How do we want to be selling this? What do we want to be highlighting? You just start to synthesize that, and that makes it into your phone pitch. It makes it into your outreach emails, right? And so, excuse me, that's kind of step one. And then you really need to start to take a look around and say, okay, what do we have? Get together with marketing. In our case, marketing is a group that doesn't really exist yet. So, normally I'd be getting together with marketing and understanding, what the larger brand is and how I can fit the employment brand into that or extend that using the employment brand, right? In our case, it's more, I'm kind of coming at it from scratch. And so it's thinking about, what are some hot buttons that we want to hit, to make ourselves kind of an employer of choice, so to speak. And then, kind of mapping out that plan to get there, right? From, okay, we're at not even V1, right? With just, here's this basic messaging. And now next step would be, let's do a refresh of our jobs page and get some more dynamic content in there, right? Let's look at things like LinkedIn and Glassdoor. Should we be getting some nice videos done around the office, what it's like to work at Snapdocs, and get that up on our careers page, et cetera. And then from there, that's kind of like the platform. And then from there, it's, I think, what about an engineering blog? What about content? What about a social media strategy? etc.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's got to be super agile too. Like it's not one of those things where obviously you can wait to get everything in place before you start going to market and start recruiting, right? Like
that's right.
nothing's going to be perfect. Hopefully you have your messaging down, and then from there, that's about it. Everything else you're kind of doing on the fly and getting together as quickly as you possibly can.
Absolutely.
Otherwise you'll never get to market and start recruiting people if you're waiting for everything to be perfect. But like you said, it's also continual evolution in the sense that, okay, now we're going to get an engineering blog up. Now we're going to, showcase these employee testimonial videos. So it's really one thing at a time. You obviously only have so many resources, but just also maintaining that backlog so you constantly know what's coming up and what's next and what's the next thing you guys want to be getting done, to just make sure it's always flowing and the employer branding content is always, getting compiled together. So when it's ready, you can start using it immediately.
That's right.
And so that was going to lead me to like one of my next questions is, obviously you're in San Francisco, you're recruiting for engineers, probably one of the most competitive places in the world to be recruiting for engineers. So, in starting up, as a startup company of 50 people, like we said, the branding might not be there yet. So what are you guys doing, to compete against, other fast growing startups and then also the tech giants that are out there?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, again, it's really just we're at the basics, right? And so it's what is our story? Let's get a solid story. Let's get those points that differentiate us, right? So, like I said in the beginning, I really touch on the fact that what we're doing is solving real world problems for real people, within a massive industry. So the opportunity is equally massive for us, right? And so that. Those two things are going to resonate, and sometimes they'll overlap and resonate with the same people, and so that makes a great target. And then I think one of the first things you can do to kind of set yourself apart is just make sure you're giving people an amazing candidate. Just treating them like gold. That's a little bit of a that kind of takes time to propagate a little bit, but every person that comes in and has a great experience, that slowly and virally starts to build that brand and get people to kind of look at you as opposed to some.
Sure. And it's something you can control, right, from day one. So, you can't control the brand of the company and how many people know about you guys yet. You can't control the size of the company yet. I mean, there's a lot of things that, you can't control necessarily from day one. That's just, kind of where you guys are at. But something you can control is a candidate experience. So if you can use that, to build a really positive experience, it can definitely be used as, a competitive advantage when you're going against, the big guys in San Francisco. So on the candidate experience side, I know you're really passionate about it. I saw, I think on LinkedIn that you recently did like a fireside chat or something, or maybe a presentation on candidate experience. So, it's a competitive advantage. Like what are some of the things that you guys are doing specifically, to really improve the candidate experience at Snapdocs?
Yeah. Candidate experience is absolutely so vital. I think, it's especially in a tight market like this and in a small valley. I mean, let's face it, right? It is a relatively small market here. Every candidate, I always tell my recruiters, every candidate you should assume will be a competitor, a vendor, a partner, a consumer, or a candidate again, right? And so it's just so important to take care of them. So some of the things that we've already done, just kind of within the structure, in the framework of the function, right, the process. So there's some rules, that I put in place. So one of them is everybody gets rejected, right? And it sounds kind of weird. Wait, you want to reject everybody? And all I mean is that everybody who needs to be rejected gets rejected. And essentially, really, what that rule is everybody gets feedback, right? It just blows my mind at what percentage of companies just don't do a very good job with feedback or rejection. Some companies I know, personally, I know there are just a large number of companies out there that they just ghost people. They never get back to people, right? And it's just right. It's outrageous. And so that's one rule that we have. So there's a whole, if somebody's applied, they can get a group email, that's fine. If you've spoken to somebody on the phone, they get a personal email. If they've spoken to a hiring manager or come in for an on-site, they get a phone call, right? And they get offered feedback. And so I think right there, that sets us apart from probably 90% of companies. I think another thing is also almost like an SLA on touch points, right? So if there's an active candidate in your process, you've got to be touching base with them every 3 days, right? Even if it's a non-update update, you're touching base with them. You're just building that relationship, right? And we're starting to do surveys, survey the candidates who do come in so that we get a sense for how we're doing and how we're improving. Some of the, another thing I do I'm thinking about rolling this out to the greater company. What I do with my recruiters is when I get to offer stage, I actually offer them references on me. What it's like to work for me. And I've had some interest from some of the other kind of, department heads and hiring managers. So it's something we might try here. I think it's a little bit different, but, I think it kind of adds, and it's kind of funny to say that's candidate experience because you're right at the end there, but I think it is part of the candidate experience. And I think it could be a differentiator, right? Like, hey, we're super transparent and we're super confident in what it's like to work here. And so why don't you talk to some folks who have worked for some of us,
I love that. I've never heard of anybody doing that. I think that's awesome. I think, a lot of companies, they'll showcase, the testimonials about what it's like to work at the company, and they'll even have employees that are referenceable of, what it's like to work at the company. But ultimately, you're working with other people, and you're working with your managers. And so I think that's probably the most important thing to get a reference on is the people that you're actually going to be spending all the time with. So I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, and I think companies forget, right? Sometimes that, and I don't know how you can forget this in this market, but in a market like this, the candidate is interviewing us as much as we're interviewing them, right? They're making a decision about us as much or more often than we're making a decision about them probably. Right. And so,
sure.
So why wouldn't we give them that extra data point?
Sure. Very cool. And so do you think, working at a startup, there's an even bigger emphasis on candidate experience?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I think so. I mean, I think it's, and again, I hate to beat a dead horse, but just in this market, right? I think it's just a way to differentiate yourself. And I think the candidate experience is, I don't know if it's more important. I guess I would say it probably is more important than at a bigger company just because the company is smaller, right? And so it's that experience is going to be, I think a proxy for people when they're evaluating, right? Going back to that idea that they're evaluating us as well. It's a proxy for them to think about, well, what's it going to be like to work with these guys every day?
Yep.
Did they treat me really well? Okay, that's a great sign, right? Were they indifferent or snooty or rude or aggressive during the process? Well, maybe that's not who I want to work with,
Yep. And then also, I mean, you have to think that in a startup, it can be a risky choice for people to, jump on board, at least, for some people that, might be opposed to taking a risk and taking a leap of faith on a company that's a little bit smaller, just, starting out. So the more you can seem like you have your act together and you seem like a company that's investing into the candidate experience and making sure that you have the proper processes in place to really nurture candidates through the hiring process, I think it says something about the company as a whole that, you're that thoughtful about things. And so I think that can kind of knock down some of those risk barriers to a candidate that might be thinking about that when, they see, okay, it is a startup, but look at how amazing and how much thought they put into the candidate experience and how well they treated me and how everything was just so well organized and structured. I think it can say a lot about a company.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Sweet. Well, this has been awesome. I just wanted to ask one more question before we'll get to, a few things that I like to ask about, some of your favorite things. So
sure.
Last question is just for anybody that's in talent acquisition, that's, maybe working at a big company or wherever they're at, maybe they're on, the agency side and they want to get into recruiting at a startup. What advice would you give them?
Oh man.
Not to ask the most loaded question ever, but maybe if there's one tip.
If I was going to give one piece of advice to somebody kind of getting into startup recruiting for the first time, I would probably just say, run. And I don't mean run away from it. I mean run fast, right? Just like you gotta just start running on day one. And, of course you need to put some thought into what you're doing, but you can't at a startup, you just can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Like you gotta get moving. Just like you said earlier, right? You start to iterate, you like we were talking about, you get the employment brand is simply the pitch that's in your outreach email to start with, right? It doesn't have to be all pretty and you don't have to have videos and all kinds of stuff, on day one, right? But if you're running towards that, then you'll be fine.
Yep. No, for sure. I know. I look back at things like we were doing when we first started out as a company. I'm like, what were
Yeah.
we thinking? We thought this was good. We thought this was okay to send to people. But at the time, number one, you might not know any better. And number two, you just might not have the resources or the time or whatever it is to get something better done. And so it's more important about just getting to market.
Yeah. Well, and you iterate, right? It's a constant iteration. I mean, so I make all my recruiters pitch. They pitch to me, when they first start with me, they pitch to me every day, right? They get sick of it. They want to avoid me because they don't want to hear me go, oh, hey, let me hear your pitch, right? But it's just a constant iteration. And yeah, the pitches oftentimes are terrible, the first week or the first couple weeks, right? But they're learning and they're iterating, and they get every phone conversation they have, every time I stop them in the hallway and make them pitch to me, it gets better and better and better, right? And you just have to be comfortable with that, right? If you're not comfortable putting yourself out there a little bit, then maybe a startup's not for you.
Yeah, definitely. And you have to be open to learning and to realizing that sometimes, you might not be right. You might think you have the best pitch, and then you go to market and you learn that it's not resonating with people. And so you have to be adaptable and switch it up.
That's right.
Cool. So just let's jump into a few questions about some of your favorite things.
Sure.
So we'll start on the work side. So what's your favorite thing about recruiting for startups?
I just love, probably my favorite thing is with the smaller companies, at startups, right? You just more quickly get to see the fruits of your labor, right? So you come in and after your first few hires, you can actually see them in the building, right? You walk in and you go, oh, look, I hired that guy. Hey, I built that whole team over there. Hey, I built the whole product team, right? So that's very gratifying, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And then what about your favorite thing of working at a startup? Like, is it something about the culture or something about the pace that really draws you to startup companies?
Yeah, the pace, the energy, the buzz, right? I just that, that kind of entrepreneurial feeling like, hey, we're doing this thing together. We're making half of it up as we go along. We're figuring stuff out. That's just fun.
Sure. And I'm sure there was something that initially drew you to the recruiting world in the first place, and maybe that's still your favorite aspect of recruiting.
Yeah, I like most people I've met over the years kind of fell into recruiting, but the thing that I quickly found that I loved about it was the matchmaking aspect, that you're putting these people together, and it's, probably outside of an actual marriage. It's kind of the next thing, right? You're spending a third of your life with these people. And so making that connection is kind of cool.
Definitely. What about your favorite personal accomplishment? Could be work related, could be a hobby, anything.
Yeah, I would say my favorite personal accomplishment is probably my kids. I've got 2 kids, both of whom we adopted, and so I think that's I'm super proud of that.
Nice. That's awesome. What about, so I thought the coolest thing when I was on your LinkedIn doing the research for the podcast, I saw one of the positions, traveler, and the company was The World.
Yeah.
That was awesome. And so you listed a ton of places. I mean, it seemed like you were, Australia, New Zealand, Asia, Europe, everywhere. So what was your favorite place you traveled to back in, I think it was like 06, 07?
06, 07. Yeah, we were moving home. We had lived in Wellington, New Zealand for about 3 years. I was recruiting. I was doing an RPO with Future Step, Corn Ferry Company. We were on site at Telecom New Zealand. And so when we finally decided to come back home, we decided, well, it would be kind of silly not to take a few months and travel around the world. Which we did. We traveled for about 4 months, and on that trip, I think, everything was so great. But Vietnam was amazing. Argentina was amazing. Hong Kong was super cool. And we subsequently went to Turkey, which is one of my favorite places that I've ever been.
That's awesome. What a nice experience. So if people want to connect with you, where can they find you? LinkedIn is the best place?
Yeah, definitely. I welcome anybody to hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm a pretty open networker, so I love to connect with new people. And folks could email me at Snapdocs as well. It's just Greg at. So it's I'm up for meeting anybody in the talent world for sure.
Sweet. And if people are interested in a career at Snapdocs, where should they go?
They should hit me up. They should hit me up directly, or they should go to snapdocs.com. And I believe right now we're calling it jobs. We're probably going to change that to careers, but right now there's a jobs link and folks can see what's open. But, as with any startup, I'm open to talking to anybody, and my team's open to talking to anybody. I mean, the startup world, it's not always about the roles that you have open on the website. There's all kinds of other needs that you're thinking about in the future. And when the right person pops up, love to talk to them.
Awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so. This was fantastic. I really appreciate it. It was really fun chatting.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate it too. Thanks so much for coming on. I know everybody's going to really appreciate the content and the advice, and it's definitely nice to speak to somebody that's, coming from a really extensive background in recruiting at startups. It's kind of my world, so I love it.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I was telling you earlier, I've been listening to a couple of the other episodes, and you're doing a great job with the podcast. So, congrats on that.
Thank you. Yeah, we're trying building it up slowly but surely. So appreciate you coming on. Everybody have a great day, and thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
We hope you found this episode impactful and would like to invite you to discover even more resources on our website at sparkhire.com/resources. Our library of HR and recruiting content, complete with webinars, ebooks, courses, and our popular video series, The Recruiting Reel, will have you ready to take on any recruiting challenge. You can find all this and more at sparkhire.com/resources. Until next time, keep retention high and growth happening.